And many people become very aware of their patterns. But knowledge is not sufficient for change. We can know we have that we tend to kind of behave a certain way or do a certain thing when we're with people or have a certain pattern, right? We can know about a tendency, but until there's this saying, a knowledge is only a rumor until it lives in the body. Right? Like there's whether we're aware of it or not, there's all sorts of sensation and feeling that compels us to have formed those patterns in the first place and then to continue with them in the present. So we can know about it, but until we can feel something different, until we can actually like feel in our bodies the experience of taking on a different choice or or trying out a different viewpoint and believing it, right? Until we can actually feel it, then the work, the lion's share of the work, I'll say, it remains.
We are gathered here today for a new episode of We're Not Okay, a Community of Healing. I am one of your hosts, Justin Stewart, and I am, of course, joined by my co-host.
Dr. Antija Allen.
And we have a very great conversation for you all. No, I say that a lot, but it's always intentional. We don't just say it just for the sake of saying it. We have the esteemed privilege of being joined today by Dr. Justin S. Hopkins, who is a clinical psychologist, educator, and psychoanalytical scholar based in Washington, D.C. He is the founder of Hopkins Behavioral Health, which is a BIPOC-centered therapy practice that helps people uncover the deeper patterns shaping their lives. Now, deeper patterns. It's key for everybody for what we get into. So Dr. Hopkins is passionate about exploring identity, trauma, and healing, as his work has reached organizations like Georgetown Law, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and No Kid Hungry. Through his practice, teaching, and advocacy, he continues to show how understanding our inner worlds can drive real change in our communities. So we're not going to go too much more into it because that's the purpose of the conversation. But again, thank you very much, Dr. Hopkins, for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a warm introduction. I'm doing well, and I'm really excited for our conversation.
So are we. So are we. As we just dive in, I think a lot of the conversations this season specifically, if we're talking about season five, we've been very intentional about discussing identity, discussing being your authentic self. When we look at your organization, one of the things that pop out through you all's website is symptoms are the surface.
Mm, mm,
Value the complex links between a person's mind, body, behavior, identity, and culture.
mm.
And what really speaks to me is understanding the roots of your challenges. So, Justin, talking from Justin, as your work helps people uncover the deeper layers of identity, those unconscious conscious patterns, unspoken traumas,
Mhm.
I want to start with from everything that you do for others. Let's look inward. And when we detail everything that you do in your work, what led you to want to pursue this when it's exploring identity and the psychology beneath it? What led you to this work?
Oh, such a wonderful question to get us started. Um, I and you're right. So much of my work is centered on helping people understand themselves and be more authentic. And I also believe no therapist worth their salt hasn't done some of that work themselves and been on the couch or looked inward. And so I relish the question, and it's something I've had to think about a lot as I've worked with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and some of the work I've done with them around intergenerational trauma. But specifically, I think my interest in mental health, of course, it stems from my own, when I really think about it, right? There's the surface level of enjoying, talking with people. I was kind of that cliche friend that people just went to for advice. And I was generally warm and a decent listener. But in terms of who I was, is I was a generation or two removed from abject poverty. My family was part of the Great Migration up from South Carolina. Both sides of my family migrated up north and in search of better opportunities. My grandfather and his father were sharecroppers in South Carolina when my grandfather left school at the age of 5 to help sharecrop and earn a living for his family. He worked on the railroad. He fought in the Korean War through the Army, but all with the intention of creating a better life for the generations to come, i.e., me. He settled in New York, Queens, New York. That's where I'm from. Most of my family is still there. And he became a barber and he built a barber shop that has thrived in Queens for over 50 years. He and my grandmother poured everything they had into that, right? Because their entire focus was we have to somehow create a future for those we haven't even met yet and those to come. Their grandchildren, my grandchildren, my grandchildren's grandchildren. That was their entire vision. So there was tireless effort and sacrifice that went into that. So they purchased the land for the barbershop to go on that the barbershop is on, or they also right next door to that my is my father's law practice. So my grandfather's and my grandmother's work allowed my father to go to law school. They supported him through that. And then he had a place to kind of establish his own law firm right there next to the barbershop. There are these interlocking doors in the back. That was my after school program. That's where I grew up. That's where I had all my first jobs, from sweeping the hair off the floor in the barbershop to typing things up for my parents. And, so it's Hopkins Barbershop and then Hopkins Law Firm. And then, of course, you can see the connection there to Hopkins Behavioral Health, continuing the legacy of my family. Um, Hard work was our lifeline. It was the only way we knew to survive was to work and and um and to focus on family, right? There's such a big thing, like family, always family first. And we're here for each other, always. And so my life centered around work though, even as a child. And I never really saw my parents rest. Certainly not my grandparents. It was like rest was taboo. It was um it was never one, it was never intentional. So if they fell asleep, they usually fell asleep on the couch watching TV. And then maybe they'd go to bed, right? Like things like that. But also kind of pushing through and bypassing what one was feeling. It was automatic. It's a norm. It's more than an expectation, right? It's just kind of a way that you do things. And so, coming into my own, both cherishing the privileges that I had as a child to grow up with parents who were successful in these ways, along with cherishing that and making sense of that, I also had to make sense of how my internal world, bustling with all sorts of stuff, was very confusing to me, and went unattended to. And I got curious. I got curious about my family. I got curious about the men who came into the barbershop and talked about some things, but not others. And I got curious about myself. And that kind of carried me into a world of intrigue and self-discovery that I think is my life's work in psychoanalytic psychology and in dealing with racial trauma.
Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Here at We're Not Okay, a community of healing, we've built a space where individuals can come together to process grief, manage stress, and share truths that are often carried in silence. Now, healing isn't only about conversation, it's also about getting the right support when you need it most.
That's where BetterHelp comes in. They connect you with licensed therapists online, anytime, anywhere. So you can get guided help from an expert in a supportive space you can trust. Therapy isn't just for the hard moments. It's also a tool for personal growth and development. And one of the best features of BetterHelp is that if you don't feel like that first therapist is the right fit, you can easily switch to a therapist that you truly connect with.
With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5-star rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform that you can rely on. It's something that you can trust. So visit betterhelp.com/the not okay pod. Again, but it's going to be down here too. betterhelp.com/the not okay pod. And with that, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy. Because just like this community, you don't have to work through life's challenges alone. So you talked about many different items. You talk about legacy. You talk about doing now for those that will be able to reap the fruits of that labor. We talk about kind of looking at it as just a way that you do things. And essentially, even when I think about legacy, we think of, some people may call it generational wealth, kind of building for those that come after us, building to be able to pass down, that way. I think we may think of our parents or our parents' parents of, I do for you so that you don't have to go through the struggles that I went through. So it's kind of continuing to pass that down. That way, the life becomes a lot more easier. As you talk about your work when it comes to the emphasis on racial healing, one other item that you did talk about was intergenerational trauma. So really looking at generational trauma as the flip side coin of generational wealth. So from your expertise, from those that you've been able to work with, when we're talking about this concept of generational trauma, again, the flip side of building up, how would you define it? And then how would you look at it as being unique when we're talking about Black communities and other communities of color?
Yeah, yeah. Well, generational trauma, the concept really, what it recognizes is that our external world impacts our internal world, and our external world impacts our physiology as well as our psychology, and that can be inherited by our offspring. Um, because trauma is anything that happens too fast, that overwhelms, is too much all at once. It can be a threat to us personally, our loved ones, or even our belief system and the things that we value. That registers as something that overwhelms our capacities in the moment, right? And so what that does is that ignites our fight or flight, the body's alarm system. And if one thing in evolutionary terms, we are designed to do is to survive. So when things activate our fight or flight, it's not something we forget. It's not something that just goes without deep regard, if not consciously, within the body, right? So if we think about our ancestors and what they went through building this country, and the brutality that they survived, right? There are all sorts of ideas, frameworks, paradigms, coping strategies, um, and things that are challenging that we've inherited, um, in an effort to continue our endeavor to survive in this country, right? So one of the things I alluded to is that, I think for us in particular, my story isn't unique in terms of hard work being a lifeline. That the wisdom of you have to be twice as good to get half as far is powerful. It's protective and that is grounded in reality, and and I think can encourage us. But it also comes with tremendous costs, which I don't think we often notice. Like, I think we just either judge ourselves based on whether we're twice as good or not. right? Either you get there or you don't, right? Either you succeed, you get the job, you make the money, or you don't, right? Like but we don't necessarily, we're not, I don't think we are people that generally makes excuses for themselves. But I think on the other side of that is I think we often struggle to have compassion for our for the areas in ourselves where we struggle. I think we don't recognize that we need rest. And I think part of what we inherited is kind of an instinct to silence or detach from the signs in our body that would suggest to us that we need to rest. We push through, you move forward, and you forge ahead. And because of that, we'll have higher cortisol levels. We will struggle more to get further, whether it be academically or professionally. Um, Executive functioning can be difficult. That's your ADHD-like symptoms when our cortisol levels are fairly high. And kind of living life with a bit of distance from what our bodies are saying. And the reason why this is saying, I mean, if you think about it, it's protective. Because if you're treated with like your body has no regard, why would you want to be in it to know what's happening? Right. So I think you survive that with immense detachment so you can get through. But I think we've inherited that detachment and also I don't, not in a full way, right? Many of us do yoga and try to, and have been, I think, in this generation, very much trying to reclaim some self-care. And this generation has done tremendous work in moving mental health narratives forward. But just that expectation to push through, right? That we still, in some ways, I think, don't necessarily honor what our bodies are trying to tell us because we have to be twice as good to get half as far.
And I'm glad that you mentioned it. Before we started recording, we talked about, for those that are listening, this is a Friday. And there's always that collective deep sigh, oh yeah, made it through Friday, made it to Friday, made it to another week. There's always that conscious decision of making it to the weekend, and then you hit Sunday and you're dreading, it's like, oh, it's almost Monday. So to what you just shared, Justin, about the things that we inherit, there's also things that we intentionally sometimes, but also unintentionally project. And I was hoping to get your opinion
Right.
on it. So when
Right.
I think about this projection, I think of, again, we don't necessarily take the rest that we need. And I think it may manifest and show itself through stress.
Right.
So I came across an article from August 2025, and it talks about how our past trauma drives our brain's response to new stress. So this is from the Yale School of Medicine. And I was trying to get your input on the correlation between stress and trauma. So I'll just highlight two quotes and then go from there. So it just said a new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences offers insight into how past stress impacts a person's response to new stress. So they give two leading hypotheses. One is the sensitization hypothesis, which poses that having a history of stress will make someone more reactive to future stressful situations. The second one is the one I'm honing in more so is the other is the habituation hypothesis, which suggests that individuals with past trauma will essentially acclimate to stress and not have as strong of a response when new stress arises.
Mm-hmm.
So, given that, I was just trying to get your input from things that you've shared just now, but kind of how it correlates into the
Yeah,
small snippets that I've pulled from that article.
that's fantastic. I'd love to see that article too after we log off if you'll share that with me.
Gotcha.
Um, to kind of speak to this first part of like the difference between stress and trauma, it's tricky because it's the same aspects of the nervous system, and it functions on the same neuronal pathways. So stress is it's our body's response to when we're anticipating that we might not have enough resources to deal with the demand, right? So if we're like running late, right, we don't have the resource of time. And that might not be enough to, well, make it on time, right? Or if you're not sure if you have enough money to pay for groceries, right? The resources, money is lacking. Or if you're living in a world that is going through minor disruption and transition, as we're all living through right now, sociopolitically, you don't know what will be required of you. So how will you know if you have ample resource? You can't tell, right? That brings you a degree of stress. Um, and so that activates fight or flight. It's not necessarily the same fight or flight that you would have when there's a car barreling down at you, but it's the same system. And when that happens, there's all sorts of things. Our heart beats faster, our blood pressure goes up, right? There's a lot of crude things that happen on the body. But with stress, it happens at a lower level and for longer periods, which is why stress is one of the leading causes of almost of so many illnesses, right? And nowadays, right, like our fight or flight is running when we get emails, right? Or we get a text message, right? Like, and it's not just responding to the things that are threatening in terms of our safety. We're responding to various demands in life. Trauma is trauma is the extreme end of a stress and fight or flight response, and it's an entire it's not just what happens in the moment. It's not an event, I would say. It's more than that. It's the internal process that happens when our capacity to cope is overwhelmed, where there is no where there isn't enough internal resource to deal with the conditions that that you have to confront in a particular time period. It could be an event, but also it could be and often is the case, it's a series of events, right? Um, and particularly with trauma, because it is so painful, because it is so overwhelming, our ability to think and process in the moment um, gets disrupted. And it actually gets lodged in our memory, encoded in memory in a different way. And so we will remember things that are traumatic differently than we would things that are not traumatic. They're remembered more so in symbol and sensation and the abstract, because it's not really mentalized, meaning all the higher order thinking that we have of reason and logic and strategy. Um, it's not accessible in the experience of trauma. So, which means we can't process it, we cannot, without support, fully process all of the ways in which trauma has imprinted on us, right? Because the experience itself is one that is separated from our higher order thinking. Um, but the body keeps the score. The body remembers. So physiologically, and we will know, and unconsciously, we will still move through life responding to that trauma, even if we did not know it happened, or we have no recollection, or if we haven't thought about it in years, right? It is an experience that happened on the body that gets encoded in our memory in a particular way that makes it hard for us to access it and think through it with our higher order like thinking skills. Um, so I agree with many things that you shared about this article that um, I do think we are more, I agree with both hypotheses, really. I do think we're more susceptible to experience certain levels of stress. Those neuronal pathways are triggered, right? You think about walking through a meadow with tall grass, right? And you walk through one way, right? That grass gets, mashed down, and you keep walking that way, right? Because it's kind of the easier way. It's low hanging fruit in terms of direction, right? Like you just keep. So there is a way in which the body, I think, very much kind of adapts to what we've been through and makes us more susceptible to experience that. Um, and I think also we tend to cope with trauma in a way uh, be, because it is unprocessed and we don't know, that repeats an aspect of the trauma inadvertently. And that too. So an example, and then I'll toss it back to you all, is someone who has the experience of being abandoned, right? It's very painful, right, to be rejected and left in that and discarded in that fashion. And you don't want that to happen again. But you also need relationship. But you will come into relationship with the hope, but also the anticipation that abandonment is possible. And to deal with that anxiety, well, maybe I won't share as much. Well, maybe I'll just be a little bit, I'll have a little bit more trepidation in how available I am to this person. And depending on how extreme my withholding, it makes it more likely for the person to not really engage and attach to us and to ultimately abandon us. Right. So trauma, I think, is singular in how it there's so many unconscious elements to it, and makes it hard for us to get out of certain cycles.
Thank you, especially for that example. Because I think about that direction of the abandonment. So let me just try to fall back, or people who will
Mhm.
leave before they get left. It's like, oh, I feel like
Yeah.
this is right. Or the opposite. I think of the people who are like, this person might try to leave. And so I call them Klingons. And then they just like,
Hmm. Hmm.
please, like I have to be in front of you, I have to be in your face all the time. We have to be together all the time. You have to call me
Hmm.
all the time. And part of that is because if you don't see me all the time and I don't see you all the time, then you might leave,
Right, right. And then,
right?
of course, you smother the person, and we all have needs for both separation and togetherness, but there's
Mm-hmm.
no space for their need for separation. So then
Exactly.
they protest that by separating more, right? It does have the, yeah, that's another side of relationship dynamic that is a consequence of certain traumatic experiences.
Thank you. So so I feel like what you shared um was a great example of somebody carrying that generational trauma and maybe not necessarily being aware of that's why they're doing this particular thing, right? Um,
Mhm.
and I also think about like I have a friend who her family was evicted when she was
Mhm.
younger. And lights out, it's another thing. Lights were turned off, all these types of situations.
Mhm.
As she got older, like she had a good job. She had great money. She was a wonderful person with budgeting, saving. But anytime she needed anything or it was like, hey, let's go on vacation, it was like, oh, I can't afford it.
Mhm.
But she could. Or it would
Mhm.
be like, if anything was due, she's gonna pay it as soon as she gets that bill in her hand.
Mhm.
And I don't think she realizes even now why she does that. But I
Mhm.
quickly, because like you, but not like you, I have a psych background, but I know mine is I'm not a
Mhm.
therapist right now. That's what I mean by not like you. um, but yeah, but so I see those signs, and then sometimes I wonder, does she recognize
Yeah.
that? And so have you seen cases of people who maybe are aware of the generational trauma and signs that that they actually are impacted by it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a lot of associations. One is that I think when we all have trauma, Black people certainly, and Black people, we have a lot of institutional trauma, systemic trauma. And when it comes to finances, so many of us carry some sort of trauma around money, whether you can kind of look over the course of history of how we've been disenfranchised or our money has been taken, right? Like our our um our our, um our entrepreneurial and economic thriving has been stolen from us through, right, like for example the Tulsa race riot, or being Black veterans not being able to access their GI Bill, being left out of the Green New Deal. um there's so many things, right, like, and we so many of us are trying to reclaim what, right, our parents or our grandparents never had access to, or even carry the shame of not being able to do certain things because of the money that we don't have, right? And what is so unfamiliar to so many of us is, right, like our white counterparts, they come from families that have had years where they could have money, right? So I was just thinking about that, and, I I had a friend who had said, she often wonders whether she would have student loan debt and better be positioned to be able to buy a house if her grandfather could have accessed his GI Bill, and could have used that money to change a cascade of decisions that would have put her in a different position and completely changed her quality of life and financial status, right? So that was just one of the things that I thought about just there, is that, like, we all carry money is such a powerful resource. We all carry some sort of paradigm around money, right? And to that end, we all have trauma, meaning we all have certain experiences that have shaped how we view the world. We all there is a the way that I put it is there is a version of reality that has its grip on every single person. And that reality is shaped by our early relationships, the pain, the gratification, the methods we use to deal with our pain, the degree of anxiety that we felt around attachment, disconnection. Um, and that is how we know who we are and how we know the world is. And we operate within that paradigm, kind of, expecting that the world will be what our experience has taught us. Um, so there are all these unconscious elements to who we are. We'd like to think that we are always calling the shots and in control. And I mean, we have some, but the predominant source of our psychology is the subconscious mind. And that is backed by neuroscience. There are more systems of memory that are subconscious than systems of memory that are conscious, right? And if you think about it, because the conscious is such a limited space, right? There's actually pressure on the mind to make things unconscious, so we're not constantly overwhelmed, right? When you're really young, you learn to tie your shoes. It quickly becomes automatic because you got other things to learn, right? So when if you grew up in a household where money was where you were strapped, right? Um, how you dealt with that anxiety or understood that anxiety as a child within your household, how people talked about it, you learned some way of navigating that, right? That you then that becomes automatic because you have to learn other things, right? So I think we all carry stuff. And to answer the last part, I work with people. I do long-term and in-depth work with people. I do psychoanalysis, which is meeting with people up to about 4 times a week. They're lying on the couch and behind them. It's a very an intense form of therapy that really dives into the subconscious. I also meet with people weekly or bi-week or twice a week or every other week for psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Um, and many people become very aware of their patterns. But knowledge is not sufficient for change. We can know we have that we tend to kind of behave a certain way or do a certain thing when we're with people or have a certain pattern, right? We can know about a tendency, but there's this saying, a knowledge is only a rumor until it lives in the body. Right? Like there's whether we're aware of it or not, there's all sorts of sensation and feeling that compels us to have formed those patterns in the first place, and then to continue with them in the present. So we can know about it, but until we can feel something different, until we can actually like feel in our bodies the experience of taking on a different choice, or trying out a different viewpoint, and believing it, right? Until we can actually feel it, then the work, the lion's share of the work, I'll say, it remains.
Thank you. And that's something I always think about is you'll hear people say, I have daddy issues. I know I have daddy issues. You know what I mean? Like they'll say it like straight out. They are aware of it. They
Yeah.
know why they do certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stop doing those things. It's
Right.
just that, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
I know
And of course
that.
the question is, well, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean exactly? Like
Exactly.
what are you afraid of? What do you yearn for? Where do you feel conflicted, right? Internally, right? So the work is far more than just knowing.
Yeah. Thank you. One thing I was wondering was how do we um I guess how do people, I don't want to say we because I hope I'm not doing it. I'm probably doing it. How do we reinforce generational trauma? Like, how do we do this? I say that because I have kids and
Yeah.
I'm like, who knows? I'm probably doing all types of things that been passed down to me. Now they're over here doing the same things.
Well, the real answer is by being human. So,
Mm.
you know, so yeah. I have no doubt you're an extraordinary mom, and you're
Thank
also
you.
imperfect because you're human, and and that benefits your child for you to not be perfect, actually. If a mother, a parent who's like too gratifying and does everything for the child before they even feel a look of stress or tension, well, that child does not grow up to be, capable of taking care of things, right? So we actually need we need the tension of reckoning with trauma, but also realizing there was never an ideal to be had in the first place, right? There was never, it's it's ubiquitous in the sense of the big T, like events or intergenerational injustices systemically, but also the little t of being a human that grew up um, under imperfect conditions with imperfect people because it's not possible to have a perfect condition or perfect people that are raising you. And so we just learn certain patterns, right? So the short answer there, is yeah, we all do in some way, right? And it's just by moving forward through life with the information that we have, what we've kind of downloaded and it's been embedded in our minds and bodies, and doing the best we can.
I'm glad you brought up that part of doing the best that you can, and thank you for the, I guess, reinforcement for me that hey, yeah, you are right. I am very imperfect, but at the same time, I'm doing my best. Yeah, and I'm
Right.
sure many of our listeners are as well. One thing that I always have come up with people is this idea of feeling like they don't like therapy doesn't work for them,
Mhm.
um in the formal sense of it, right? Do you think there's other ways to kind of reach that point of healing, or maybe get to the point where they feel comfortable going to formal therapy?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, I've heard those comments as well. I hear stories that people tell me about their therapists and are mortified. I'm like, and I hear stories where I'm like, I think you should go to them and have a conversation, and there might be some stuff in here that's for you to consider, and to try to work through, right? And then I hear stories of like, I'm so grateful for what I'm doing. But I think the way one the match is so important. Like you have to find a therapist that is a good match, and that therapist needs to be able to kind of hold their own stuff, and to know their own stuff, to put their own stuff aside, and to make every effort possible to understand you, the patient. And ultimately, that's what you look for. Like, are you being understood? And is there a warm, encouraging accountability that helps you to see yourself? That doesn't make decisions for you, but helps you to see yourself so you can better make decisions for yourself, right? And that's I don't think everyone has that experience in therapy. It's the kind of experience that I think it's what makes therapy work. So um, I forget your question now, but I do think therapy can work for just about everybody, but there's got to be the right fit. And also, of course, there are many other things that people can turn to as a source of healing and self-growth.
Thank you. No, you answered my question
Okay.
perfectly. Yeah. Um, and one thing that I thought of just because of the your focus on psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic therapy is that
Mhm.
idea of transference as well. You
Yes.
know, where someone
Yeah.
is in therapy and they're having a reaction to you, but their
Yeah.
reaction to you is because you remind them so much of someone, and so
Yeah.
that might be the thing that makes them want to leave, but that's also the thing that if you have the right therapist, they'll notice it, and
Yeah.
it should be what keeps you there, if that makes sense.
100%. Right. Transference and countertransference, we'll define those terms in a moment. That is part of the that is very much the special kind of experience or dynamic within therapy that brings knowledge into sensation, knowledge into emotion that you experience, and that can be transformative. So transference is when the patient is having a reaction to the therapist that actually models another important relationship in their life that was crucial to their development. Right? Like we don't necessarily internalize people that are in our lives. We internalize our experience of those people, right? And and then we, quickly discern how to navigate that experience, and that strategy becomes unconscious, right? So, and then, you keep navigating in the same way. Well, it actually, right, the patterns can continue, right? So unless you can access the unconscious stuff, right, it's really hard to change patterns. It's really, really hard to change patterns. So countertransference is when the therapist is having a personal response to the patient. It could be something like frustration or even sadness or a kind of affection. But any sort of emotion or reaction or appraisal that comes from within the therapist, that's part of the countertransference. And the beautiful thing about this is that, well, one, we always transpose our early relationships um, onto our current relationships. That particularly in our intimate relationships and partnerships, right? That alongside the adult relationship, there's a concurrent childhood paradigm that is also active. And when there are moments of hurt, rejection, disappointment, where the stakes are highest, and when it comes when with love, right? That there are these old things that are part of your experience and how you deal with it, right? And that will happen in the therapeutic relationship. Right. That you on some level, and the therapist will hopefully have enough knowledge about your experience and who you are to respond to it in a fashion that can help you see that there's an what's called an enactment or a recreation of those early dynamics, or that they somehow contributed along with the therapist to an interaction that led to a kind of suffering that's familiar to them. And that seeing that is hard, right? It's painful, but it's also precisely the kind of thing that can help people be a bit more free, and to integrate what they did not know, um, such as like how they impact their relationships, and may get some of the same results that they tend to get.
Thank you for look, we got a psychology lesson today. I love this. I love this. Um, along those lines, I'm thinking about how some people will go to therapy, they're working through their trauma, and they have this idea that, well, I should be quote unquote fixed by now,
Hmm.
right? Which clearly is not true. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. What are some misconceptions you have noticed that people have around this idea of trauma and healing from trauma?
Yeah, well, one we kind of discussed earlier is that that if we know better, we should automatically do better. It's a bit more complicated than that, right? We have neuronal pathways, we have unconscious patterns, and we have sensations that compel us um, to show up in certain ways that have to be dealt with and worked through. Um, Another is that the therapist can solve your problems. Um, I don't so much solve people's problems as much as I help them identify the problem within that they didn't know was there. Um, and help them to I listen in a sort of way that helps me understand something that they may not they don't know about themselves. And that information and then in noticing it happen with me and talk about what's happening right with me that actually can is what helps people to resolve an issue. Right? The other one of the hardest questions I get is how long is this going to take? And I and I still don't have an answer to that for anybody. But what I usually tell people is that you will do this for as long as you see it bearing fruit in your life and not a moment longer. Um, and that's what we can go by. But it definitely takes time to establish a relationship, to be able to talk in a kind of candid fashion where we are uncensored, and to build up a form of trust. And that's actually really hard to do because we are naturally censored, right? We speak in ways that are civil and with concern for the other. Um, and that's just kind of like automatic. We are naturally censored in how we show up in our day-to-day lives, right? And so to come in this relationship and kind of throw that to the wind, right? It's not, it doesn't work that quickly. It takes a time to kind of build that up. So those are the number one things that I think yeah, like people just come in with different ideas about that I often have to talk to people about.
And I think that's always the misconception of we think it's just one session or go through these 5 sessions and I'm done. But as with everything, it's just a lifelong journey. Everything is a lifelong journey. And I'm not sure where I got this from. It's on my whiteboard somewhere. It's kind of the question of are you healed or have you just not been triggered yet? And it's you think you go through these sessions and as soon as the
Mm,
thing happens, then you respond the way that you would normally respond. It's like, well, I went to all this therapy. It's like, well, you started unpacking it, but did you really resolve it? And then
right.
even through that, I started thinking of while we were talking of uh to me, therapy comes off as like 3 A's, kind of awareness of, attention to, and action forward. So
Mm,
those are things that you always keep in a cycle of continuing to have awareness, as Antija mentioned. But what do we do with that awareness as opposed to kind of leaning on or leveraging to say, oh, well, I know I do this issue, but I just do it. Don't blame me. I got daddy issues. It's what comes with the territory. But then it's like, how do you have
right.
attention to it and how do you do action forward? I
Right.
was reading a book earlier, The Anxious Generation, that as we were talking about,
Oh, it's a wonderful book. I've read chapters. I haven't read
yeah,
the whole thing, but it's a wonderful book.
and it pulled from the aspect of adolescence and kind of how modern day parents are fearful of letting their children
Yes.
ride the school bus or walk home alone. And it may be things that we may have encountered, but we're not aware of the fact that some of these lessons learned are being removed from the child's development. So they're
Yeah.
not enabling them to experience certain things, even though we might have been good, bad, or indifferent, it was still part of the growth. So we're kind of robbing them from that opportunity to kind of develop or learn because
Right.
ultimately they'll become adults. So
Right.
no real question to it. I just
No,
wanted to
no,
mention that.
that's wonderful, and I mean it goes back to the idea of the imperfect parent, and if you resolve all the issues, and but one of the things that that book also talks about is that there's an entire generation of children that and adolescents that have never at any point been in a space where they did not have access to their parent at the ready because they have a cell phone, they can text. Right. there's never like, right, like public transportation, like find your way. Like if you get lost, there isn't a phone nearby. You might have to find a payphone. You might have to get change. You might have to deal with the anxiety and uncertainty of not knowing how to resolve an issue that is urgent on your own. And that is not an experience that any of the adolescents of today have. Um, I think there are probably scenarios, so the absolutes are never true, but it's not a common experience anymore. And if we cannot grow without tension. Like we cannot grow without challenge, without conflict, right? Healing is Being healed is wonderful. Growth is wonderful. But the process is difficult. And change is difficult. Transformation is difficult. And our our mind and our mental and emotional capacities expand when there's I will say the right amount of tension that that propels us to try something new, to come up with a new idea, um, or develop another capacity. So I really like that book. For those of you who are listening, I'm going to go back to it and read the chapters I haven't, but even the small bits that I have, it's it's a really good one, and speaks to an issue of our generation that's really important right now.
Agreed. Definitely recommend for those that haven't read it. It's a good read. It's a good read. So as we come towards the closer of things, it's been it's been fulfilling. It's been filling. It's been a conversation that I think speaks to things that I'm developing in my as I continue to grow the journey and then discovery. So we appreciate the time that you've been able to give us and through your organization, through the therapy that you provide. But as we start to come to as we start to come to a conclusion, I think we have the most important question that we have for you throughout this whole conversation.
Yeah.
We proposed it as a surprise because
Okay.
this can either make or break everything that we've done today.
You're really setting the stage for this.
So, Justin, for you, for everything that you do give out, for all of the knowledge that you provide, all of the healing that you provide, when it comes to yourself, what are the moments for you that bring you the most joy?
Yeah, yeah. This is so wonderful. Um, One, I'm in my own therapy, which is so important for me. Um, Two, my nephews and niece, they are 8, 4, and 2, and it just looking at them and talking to them breathes life into me. They're starting. The oldest is playing sports. The youngest is, I mean, the middle is starting to get there, and seeing them thrive and grow, and all of a sudden have be able to have a kind of conversation that they couldn't the month prior. It's just that's incredible for me. And then lastly, connecting with friends. Connecting with friends. I think we need each other more than ever, and leaning into yeah, it's been on my mind more and more to lean into the experience of being with other people that I can really, really enjoy.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
But as we come to a conclusion, again, it's been an absolute pleasure
Mhm.
learning with you, having you as part of our community, having this companionship, this community that we've built, and we're excited, appreciative of the fact that you decided to join us. So
Yeah.
again, for those that are listening, for those that are watching, we have the esteemed pleasure of speaking today, of learning from today from Dr. Justin Hopkins. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks, everyone. This was lovely. I appreciate it.
Thank you.